All right, we'll call the January 24th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. The time is 7:19. All commissioners are present. Just a brief announcement to my fellow commissioners. Last night at City Council, they appointed our vacant seat to Miss LaDonna Thompson, and she will be joining us at our next P&Z meeting.
Actually, it's Bacon.
Oh,
Miss
Bacon.
LaDonna
I'm sorry.
Bacon.
Okay, next item on the agenda, hearing of residents. We had nobody sign up. Does anybody wish to make any comments? All right. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, consent agenda. Item A, PC 2017-059. Consider and act upon a request for approval of a final plat for Lot 1 of the Sharp subdivision, an approximately 1 acre tract of land located at 2233 Den Ott Hill, City of Schertz, Guadalupe County. And item B, PC 2017-041, consider and act upon a request for approval of a final plat for Unit 4 of the Reserve at Schertz 2 subdivision, an approximately 29 acre tract of land generally located 900 feet northeast of the Greytown Road and Bandig Road intersection, City of Schertz, Bexar County. Commissioners, do we need to pull any of these for discussion?
Item 3B for me, please.
Okay. So for the consent agenda, we'll have item 3A. Do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Outlaw.
Second.
A second by Mr. Greenwald. Any comments, discussion? Seeing none, call for a vote.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
3A consent agenda.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 6-0. Okay, item 3B, PC 2017-041. Bryce?
So this item is a request for a final plat of the Reserve at Schertz 2, Unit 4. The preliminary plat was approved on on March 8th of 2017. The original master plan for this subdivision was approved on April 9th, 2014. Units 1, 2, and 3 have been platted and recorded. This is the fourth unit and final unit of this subdivision. It is 29 single-family lots on approximately 29 acres of land. It does pass all of city staff's reviewed it and has no objection on this item, so I'm happy to answer whatever your questions are, Mr. Bro.
One regards Lazar Parkway. Lazar is off of our master thoroughfare plan.
Correct.
Why are we still giving credit for that to developers?
So it was credited before it came off of the plan, and it's on the master plan, so they're going through with it. There are city plans to work with the HOA to turn it into actual parkland as opposed to a roadway.
Okay.
So it'll be a linear park.
The entire development, or I should say most of the development, drains into a detention pond, lot 16, block 18.
That's correct.
That detention pond, therefore, most of the development drains into private property to the southwest. Are we positive, are we sure, from a city standpoint, that the drainage from this development is not going to make conditions any worse than they normally are on that private property?
So all items on this have been, entire drainage report has been reviewed and approved by the city engineer and is compliant with all of our development conditions, which generally speaking is that you cannot change, that the post-development flows need to match the pre-development flows in roughly the same locations and concentrations.
So our plan as it exists ensures that the drainage won't be worse than it is today.
It will be the same or better.
Okay.
All right, commissioners, any other comments?
I got one more, trying to formulate it here.
Okay.
From the detention pond. Okay, never mind. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a motion for approval?
Mr. Chairman, make a motion we approve PC 2017-041.
Okay, it's a motion by Mr. Greenwald. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Outlaw. Comments or questions? All right, call for a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries 6-0.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda, public hearing. Item A, ZC 2017-017, hold a public hearing, consider and make a recommendation to City Council on a proposal to rezone approximately 1.5 acres of land from single-family residential district, R1, to office and professional district, OP, located approximately 220 feet southeast of the intersection of East Live Oak Road and FM 3009. Emily?
Good evening, Commissioners. So as you said, the subject property is located 220 approximately feet southeast of East Live Oak, which is here, and 3009. Subject property can be seen here in green. It's approximately 1.5 acres. On January 12th, 26 public hearing notices were mailed out to the subject properties within the 200-foot buffer, our typical red line. At this time, we've received 3 in favor from this property, and this property, so the corner and the subject property. And we've received 1 opposed from this from this property here. On January 12th, the zoning notification signs were placed by the applicant, so you can see that sign in these 3 pictures. This is the proposed zoning exhibit, which you can see the subject property here, and then they've outlined the 200-foot buffer as well. The current zoning on this property is single-family residential. So again, subject property by the green star. To the north, we have apartment multifamily, the R4, and then on the other 2 sides, we have single-family residential and then 3009. This property is currently developed with a single-family home. To the rear, also developed with single-family, and then on this side is undeveloped. On the comprehensive land use plan, it is identified as single-family residential, which encourages a mix of residential uses as well as limited commercial development to support the daily activities. The proposed rezoning is in conformance with that, as office professional is a limited lower intensity commercial use. So going into that office and professional district, it's not one that we y'all typically see a whole lot as a rezone, so I wanted to provide y'all the definition out of the UDC. So it is intended to provide suitable areas for the development of office structures as well as office park developments on appropriately designed and attractively landscaped sites. So it really is designed for those office uses. So speaking of this lower intensity commercial, we kind of either categorize it as office and professional or neighborhood services. So office and professional allows these 18 land uses, where our next lowest intensity commercial would be that neighborhood services, which allows 34 land uses. So what you're looking at here, it's those 18 uses that would be allowed if this property was rezoned. So you have, obviously your office, medical, dental, professional. You also have something like a bank, gymnastics, dance studio, restaurant, something like that. So this proposed rezone should have minimal impact on water and wastewater, since it is directly adjacent to 3009, and also public services. In some of the correspondence that I've received from residents through phone calls and things of that nature, there's been some questions about buffering against the adjacent residential. So just like any other commercial property adjacent to residential, they would be required to install an 8-foot-high masonry wall. Inside that masonry wall, they'd be required to do 20 feet of landscape buffer with 1 shade tree every 30 feet and 10 shrubs every 50 feet. So that would be on all 3 sides that are not the 3009. The proposed zoning of office and professional district would provide for commercial uses that are appropriate and compatible with the adjacent residential properties. Additionally, office and professional district provides the opportunity for limited commercial and office that the comprehensive land use plan desires and encourages in single-family residential. And at this time, staff is making a recommendation of approval.
All right, thank you, Emily. The applicant is going to make a presentation, but we're going to do that within the public hearing. So we're going to open the public hearing at 7:29, and if you'd like to come up and make your presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Karen Mitchell with Mitchell Planning Group, 7823 9 Mile Bridge Road in Fort Worth, Texas. Thank you for allowing us to come before you this evening. I'd also like to thank the city staff for all of their help in helping us to get to this point. We are requesting that this property be rezoned to the lowest intense non-residential use that you guys allow for in your UDC. The staff did a very good job in pointing out all of the information in the staff report. In looking, I'm just going to kind of breeze through this. Prior to us submitting an application, we did contact through the mail the property owners that were immediately adjacent to this in hopes of trying to meet with them. We had tried to see if there was like a HOA in this particular neighborhood that we could do a neighborhood meeting with everybody, because it's my understanding that there has been other rezoning requests on this piece of property, and we wanted to be able to reach out to the neighborhood beforehand to let them know exactly what it is that we are proposing to do. We did not, we received one phone call from one of the property owners, basically giving some history of the rezoning, the last rezoning, and I believe it was for a proposed retail use. Ours is not going to be for any type of retail use. We also asked if there was anybody that we could contact so that we could do a neighborhood meeting, and that we did not get any kind of information back on that. So if there are any neighbors here tonight, I'm glad that they are here, and I'm hoping we'll be able to answer any questions for any concerns that they may have of what our use is. As you guys are aware, when you typically have single-family residential, and then you have vacant property, and then you have a primary arterial on the other side, you typically want to look at what's called transitional zoning. And this type, like your UDC and Emily just pointed out, this is your lowest intense non-residential use. The property is zoned single family, but you cannot develop it as single family. The UDC has very specific regulations in place that do not allow any kind of curb cuts or any homes facing a primary arterial. The lot is too narrow to be able to get an internal street in there so that you would not have any house facing it. So it is virtually impossible to be able to build any kind of single family residential. So the next step that you would look at is what type of use could you put there that is going to have the least impact on the single-family residential. And we believe that our use fits that. We're not looking, again, at putting any retail. We're actually looking at putting in it's a medical office. I'll go into detail about that, but it's a specialized medical office there. So when we're looking at the benefits of the professional office use, it is the lowest intensity, no retail by right or with an SUP. This is typically a use that's open Monday through Friday, closed in the evenings, closed on the weekends, and it's a very low impact use that does not generate very much traffic. So our proposed use is for a dialysis facility. The patient hours for the dialysis facility are Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. There's 3 shifts with this. They never fill up all of the slots in those 3 shifts. They do this in increments of 3 different times. They'll have half of the units in the morning. They'll have a small amount in the middle part, and then a small amount in the afternoon, because they have to have time to switch things up so that they can clean each of the stations. It takes about 2 hours after the patient leaves in order to clean that particular station. So in this particular one, this is a company, believe it or not, that started in the 15th century in Germany, in Frankfurt, Germany, and they have built in the medical facility over time. They started off as a pharmacy, and then they turned into cardiovascular, and then they brought in renal. They're the ones that actually invented the dialysis machines that everybody uses today. So they are very well known. They're on the New York Stock Exchange as well as the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. And I've kind of gone over with you the reason why we can't develop it as it's zoned. There's the provision out of the UDC on this. So in summary, we comply with the comprehensive plan. We will be complying with the regulations of the UDC, including putting up the screening that's required. If you have any questions, I'll hopefully be able to answer them. If not, Walt McMenemy with Cross Development is here, and he may be able to answer what I can't.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Any citizens here wanting to speak on this, please come up to the podium and state your name and address for the record.
Jimmy Van Slyke. I reside at 124 Patrick Henry in Greenfield Village. My concern is not so much with the land use, but the traffic flow. Trying to get out of Patrick Henry with the current state of traffic on 3009 is, to say the least, challenging. More like a game of Frogger. When you add a commercial building in that area where it is undeveloped, which is, by the way, if you stand at Patrick Henry and look that direction, it's a blind curve. You also have the people that live on the other side in Silver Tree and the 2 streets of Garden Homes. I think they're Greenfield Village Unit 2. You only have 1 center turn lane, no traffic light. So I'm just concerned that the impact of commercial buildings in that zone will cause us more hazards than we have today. And potentially, could I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, the public hearing is open.
Your slide showed that people would be bussed in. Your slide showed that people would be bussed in?
No buzzed in. No. They will be, they'll come in.
Dropped off.
They like, it would be.
Okay, I
yeah,
took
a
dropped
spouse-
off as being a bus.
No. A spouse that's bringing
Okay.
a loved one in to
Okay.
have the dialysis, because it's like a 3-hour process that they have to go through, then they come back and they.
Okay, I read dropped off as being a bus.
Oh, sorry, yeah, no, car.
So that, I was going to say the bus doesn't sound like a bad idea because that's 1 vehicle. So then we amplify that by the 3-shift turnover. And if 200 feet from Live Oak Road, where there is a traffic signal, you're going to add people trying to turn, I can just tell you, I hear sirens all night, all day now. I'm just concerned about that for the safety of the citizens. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any comments? All right, then, we'll close the public hearing at 7:38. Okay, commissioners, comments, questions?
I can start. I think we have an edit problem with the 017 or 019 for the case number.
Yeah, I was just pointed that out by Mr. Greenwald, pointed that out to me. On the agenda sheet, it shows as case ZC 2017-017, and on the packet portion of the item, it shows as ZC 2017-019. So for making the motion, which item would it be?
So the one that we're using internally is 019, so I apologize for that mistake. So that ZC case number, it's really just our internal way of tracking, just so y'all know. But I apologize for that error.
Emily, is this property already platted?
No, sir. So if the zoning gets approved, they would have to go through the same process. They'd have to plat it, they'd have to do site plan, building permit.
Do we know approximately what size the facility is going to be?
Right now, it's proposed at 10,300 square feet.
So then when we add parking lot, we clear some trees, so in some regards, then it will open up the visibility on that blind curve a little bit.
Yes.
Because we'll be removing some of those trees.
Yes.
I'm not, well, I'll ask it anyway. Do we know if TxDOT is willing to open a curb cut at this location? This may not be appropriate for this meeting, but
Ms. Mitchell, I think they've talked to.
The next step, if we get approval of the zoning on this particular one, we have to work with TxDOT. TxDOT will be, I'm sure, be giving us a curb cut, but what they're going to probably want us to do is work to see if it's possible that we do shared drive approaches, but definitely do connectivity to the property to the south, because, you know, TxDOT's whole deal is they want to make sure that we reduce as many curb cuts as possible, so that's what they typically encourage and almost require us to do to meet their separation standards. But we would be doing that in the next step.
thank you.
Yes,
Also, while you're talking to TxDOT, will y'all consider putting in a right-hand turn lane? Because you get the traffic off of 3009, which is trying to come from that red light around that curve, and it's moving pretty fast. It's in a pickup mode.
Right, when we get into the site plan design of it, where we're going to be working with the city staff, that's the time we'll be working out all of those details.
Just asking you to consider for the future. We'll remind city staff, I assure you.
And Emily, where does the sound wall start? Does that go along the front of this property?
Yes.
No? Start somewhere after this property?
The sound wall?
The wall.
Oh, yes.
TxDOT built.
It starts after?
Yeah, it starts at the built subdivision that's a block further down.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, on that side of 3009, the wall would be starting on the other side of Patrick Henry.
That wall is right there.
Just so y'all know, kind of as the general process, since it does, if it goes through zoning and, you know, gets approved and they want to move on to the next step, as part of the plat, we cannot move the plat forward to all of y'all for consideration unless we get TxDOT's no objection to access and drainage. So TxDOT has to sign off on it before we can even bring it here, so y'all know.
But that's okay.
And again, I'll remind the commissioners that this is just a zoning case, and again, like Emily mentioned, that there are other issues that'll come up with the site plan and plating process that we'll be able to address at that time.
We don't see it at site plan. So, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, Chair will entertain a motion.
I move that we approve, I move that we make a recommendation to City Council to change the zoning for case ZC 2017-019, William Dietz zoning R1 to OP.
Okay, I have a first. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Ray. Any other comments or questions? All right, call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. All right, motion carries 6-0. Next item on the agenda, item ZC 2018-001. Hold a public hearing, consider and make a recommendation on an amendment of Part 3, Schertz Code of Ordinances, Unified Development Code, UDC, Article 9, Section 21.9.9, Tree Preservation and Mitigation. Bryce, put on your dancing shoes.
I've been wearing them all week. So, Commissioners, I have pounded this over and over for the last 2 meetings, so I will attempt to be significantly more brief and hopefully get you all home for dinner, including our attorney, Mr. Santee. So this item that you have before you, as we have continued on, is the actual action item for modifying tree mitigation and preservation section. So what I'll go over just real quick is some high-level highlights, and then we can have the public hearing, and I'll field any questions from the public and the commission as well. So the first big item is that we've added class in addition to the protected and heritage trees. This was done for clarification because, as you'll notice in other sections of this, we talk about tree protection standards, and I just wanted to make sure that we were very clear and consistent all the way through. Whenever we reference a protected class tree, that we're talking about that specific size tree that's defined, and the same thing with heritage. So again, it's just that kind of clarification. The second big item is that we changed the diameter at breast height measurement from 4 feet to 4.5 feet, which complies with both state law and industry standard. Additionally, we created an exemption from preservation requirements for heritage class trees located within utility easements. So it's only from preservation requirements, not from mitigation. They're still responsible for mitigation if they remove a heritage-sized tree within an easement. All that we're saying, though, is I'm not going to dock you on your 25% preservation when you may have a tree that needs to come out for an easement. However, as we talked multiple times, and I'll cover at the very end about the waivers, there's some times that the waiver could be issued for this, other times that staff will look at it and say, nope, you could have saved that tree easily by scooting your road over, residential developer, sorry. Don't have to preserve it, but you do have to pay to take it out. The next item was we created an exemption from preservation and mitigation requirements for protected class trees only that are listed, that are of species that are listed on our undesirable tree list, table 2197F. So that's in the landscaping section. We've got a big thing of trees that says these trees on this list are undesirable. This is in addition to the exemption that we have still at the very end. That's a species exemption. We created an exemption from preservation and mitigation requirements for protected class and heritage class trees located on property with an existing one-family or two-family dwelling that's occupied. This in part is due to state law. This is also in part due to practice and the general feel that staff has seen from both the commission and council. The concept behind this is that if you have an existing home that's your house, that has a built house on it, has somebody lives there, you don't have to, tree mitigation and preservation do not apply to you anymore. Because the main goal of tree preservation and mitigation requirements from how it's actual in practice here, especially with new development, is to make sure that developers are not coming in and clear-cutting land. We're really preserving those nice trees the best that we can. And if you're going to remove a bunch of trees that you're going to pay for them when you do that development, I have a much less issue when I have that homeowner with a 9-inch elm tree that's in the middle of their backyard in addition to the other trees, and they say, I finally saved up enough to put my swimming pool in. Wait a second, I have to pay another $900 just to take this tree out. Those are not the cases that we run into big issues on. So what we're proposing is to just completely remove it. I will comment that San Antonio does have that same item, that they do exempt single-family dwellings completely out. We've added the two-family because that's a state law item. That state law says we cannot charge a fee for mitigation for removing trees in built single-family homes and that are less than 10 inches. And so our standard for protected class has been 8 inches. As we talked with the commission on previous meetings, staff's proposal is to go this route to really capture the main goal of what we're looking for and kind of let homeowners do their thing on their own piece of Texas that we all love as a property rights state. Additionally, we've changed references for consistency from Director of Parks and Recreation and Community Service to City Manager, his or her designee. Y'all have seen this before in some other updates we've run. We changed the minimum replacement tree size, so if you're going to mitigate and put a tree back in place and count inch to inch, The minimum size for that's 2.5 inches. We came down from 3 because 2.5 inches is our current requirement for new planting. So why wouldn't we just make it all the same? If I can plant a new tree at 2.5, but I have to mitigate a tree at 3, doesn't make a lot of sense. So went ahead and made that change. We updated the tree preservation credits to provide additional clarity on how tree credits are calculated and used. And so when I say tree credits, what we're referencing is trees that are preserved on on non-residential sites and multifamily sites. So those are the sites that are site planned, which are within buffer areas or that they preserve against the 9 trees per acre requirement. So this is against new planting requirements and not if I saved 80%, then I don't have to pay mitigation for the 20% I took out. It's not that kind of credit. It's a credit against new plantings for developing the lot based on our landscaping standards. Things that you'll see where this has worked, the Oaks at Green Valley 2, that the strip center that's got the Fox's Pizza in it and the Vessel CrossFit location. As you know, they've got gorgeous, huge oak tree right up front. Some of the goal of this is to provide kind of an inch-to-inch and 3-inch items for heritage to reduce some of those street trees. So what I don't end up with is trees that are too close together or trees that are planted under these nice big heritage trees that are in these landscape buffers or on site that they're preserving. So again, that is one that we will keep a very close eye on to make sure that we've got the percentages right and everything like that. And if something looks like it's starting to go awry, we will be the first ones to bring it back to you. Additionally, we remove the section for criteria for a tree removal permit because the tree removal items are inherently, if you meet the criteria to remove the preservation, so on and so forth, that the rest of that didn't make a lot of sense because it had a lot of subjective nature to it, which is not how we process that permit. Additionally, we haven't issued a true permit, but it's a function of additional permits such as a clearing and grading permit or a building permit or remodel or pool permit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Very rarely is somebody just saying, I just need to remove this tree. So I don't think we've processed just a tree removal permit since I've been here in the last 4.5 years. It's always tree removal in conjunction with something else. Finally, we created an ability for an administrative waiver to mitigation fees for heritage class trees in specific circumstances, and additionally the ability for an administrative waiver to that 25% preservation requirement. So as y'all probably look through those red lines, you will see that there are only very, 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 very specific items you can get a waiver to, not just anything. And so again, the waiver also must meet some criteria, which will include that the removal of the tree doesn't have a significant negative impact on erosion, soil stability, flow of surface waters, protection of adjacent trees, or wind breaks. Some of that's in there, so again, we prevent this clear cutting. The requested waiver doesn't violate the intent of this UDC section. Again, kind of in that clear cutting mentality. Strict interpretation of the provisions of this section would deprive the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by other nearby properties in the same zoning district or with the same land use that would have to comply with these same provisions. And so this you may recognize as being a very similar statement to some of the variances that Board of Adjustment grants. The goal of that is basically saying certain properties are going to have unique conditions. We have talked about Dr. Bamel's veterinary clinic that she's been site planning and platting, and it's very unique condition that it has a drainage way that covers regional drainage on the backside of her property. Not every property along 35 has that same condition. In fact, the next property over to going north up 35, I believe, does not have any of that on it. So they wouldn't have that same predicament. However, somebody else may in a different location, and so we really want to make sure that we can focus on those unique aspects. And then finally, a reasonable effort to preserve the tree has been made, and reasonable alternatives have been evaluated and determined to be feasible. This is where staff will really shine through and say, hey, here are all these other great options that we love to give developers that always cost them more money and make their eyes roll, and make them evaluate that to say, yeah, this is really the only feasible way to do it. Again, using Dr. Bamel's property, we evaluated the fact that she's got 4 or 5 heritage trees that are along the bank of an existing drainage channel that substandard needs to be improved even further. Their engineer evaluated the possibility of using concrete to wall it off, diverting the channel, going underground with it. None of them were really feasible, and none of them actually still kept all the trees. So those are the kind of situations that we would go ahead and have the developers, in order to request this waiver, evaluate these other things that staff would say, here's an idea, go run the numbers, submit us proof that you ran the numbers, and let us evaluate what you evaluated to see if we can get there. Again, that's kind of that safeguard provision for staff to then say, you know, we don't just give everybody a waiver, you really have to have this very unique condition, but it's not necessarily this legal hardship level that would be a variance, but still very specific criteria. So with that, I am happy to, we can have the public hearing, and I'm happy to answer any questions that we have.
And we'll open the public hearing at 7:54. Anyone having any comments from the public, please come on up to the podium and state your name and address for the record and whatever comments you have to make. Only 3 members of the public remaining in the audience. I don't see anybody moving, so I guess we'll close the public hearing at 7:55. Commissioners.
Item 8.
That's correct, but the way that the permit gets processed, it gets processed as a function of other permits issued, and so there's not always a specific permit that's issued. The same way that you'll notice in various sections of the UDC, we reference a site plan permit at times, I believe. There's some references in UDC to things like that. But yes, because what they have to do is they still have to submit the application items for it. Yes, so DBH inches are done in caliper inches, so it's a width measurement as opposed to a true, functional diameter, since trees aren't perfect circles. But is your question that we need more specification on total number of caliper inches that it's of protected and heritage class trees?
Mr. Greenwald, I'm sorry, we're having difficulty hearing you here. Could you speak into the microphone?
I'm sorry. Lost my train of thought. Get somebody else, and let me give me a minute to.
So maybe this will help with some of the clarification, because typically in the industry, when we measure trees, we always measure them in caliper inches, and then DBH is the point at which they're measured. Up here in on the first page on B2, the following definitions shall be applicable to the provisions of this section. We do talk about protected class trees having a DBH of measured at 4.5 feet of 8 inches to 24 inches as being designated as protected class. Is it something that you want me to just add in DBH caliper inches? Would that provide you the clarification I guess you're looking for?
I think I know what developers know.
Yes, because what we would want to see is, ideally, based on these new requirements, when somebody submits a tree survey, we want to see all of the protected and heritage class trees that are on site. They'll then identify what's exempt, what's being removed, what's being preserved, so that we can run those calculations and verify those numbers. So if it would be helpful, I can absolutely go in and change everywhere where we have caliper inches to perhaps say caliper inches at DBH or DBH caliper inches, since we've already defined that term DBH in that section.
What are you expecting the developers to give you as far as dimensions?
Correct. So it's in inches. And so what we could do is I could add in for clarification. So it'd basically say, the total number of caliper inches, and maybe even just say measured at DBH to be removed. And I can add that in everywhere where we have caliper inches to both give you the diameter requirement as well as where it's measured on the tree for that addition. Sure.
That I think
Absolutely.
Looking at your points on here, on the bullet points, creating an exemption from preservation and mitigation requirements for protected class trees that are of a species listed as undesirable. So taking it from the backside, if they're listed as heritage class, they will be required to be mitigated, correct?
That is correct. And I believe we do have that portion again on the waiver for us to evaluate. If the commission wants to make it that the heritage class trees are also exempt, we can take a look at that. I'm happy to, I think Emily brought a UDC, I'm happy to pull up that undesirable list if you all want to take a look at it. I think there's possibly some value of some of those trees. Once they get to 24 inches, is it worth having that second thought of? And that's kind of what staff's opinion was on some of that. So, again, we do have the by right exemption on species for the cedar, the hackberry, the I think ligustrum's on there, Chinaberry. Those that we kind of really consider as those trash trees. Whereas some of the other items that are on, I'm happy to pull up that undesirable list if you'd like to look at.
And just to revisit, this is coming forward to just to revisit this, we're bringing this forward simply to create some flexibility for these very unique and rare cases, and this is not something that's going to be applied to general development. As a commission, I think over the last couple of years, we've taken a couple instances to provide a little bit more flexibility in terms of what we're doing with the UDC. We've relaxed the restrictions for outbuildings, for fence replacement. Council has even recently reduced or eliminated the need for the garage sale permits. Again, everybody may or may not agree with these types of moves, but to move to a little bit less regulation and a little bit more flexibility. And the pendulum certainly swings both ways, but I think giving the ability to be a little bit more flexible in rare and unique circumstances is probably a good thing to allow for accommodation of these unique circumstances. I already asked staff this morning that they will come back to us at some point in time and provide us an update as to what kind of waivers they've had to issue under this amendment if we do approve it tonight. And so we'll be able to get some follow-up information on that, and that this proposed change is not anything that's going to be permanent. If we don't like what we're seeing, we can always come back and change it. But the idea of being willing to take a calculated risk to allow for some things to move forward, I think is a good idea. But as part of that, we also have to be willing to accept that we might get something in a one-of case that we don't like, and at which point we can go back and revisit and make the appropriate changes. So those are my comments.
See how many complaints we get. Garage sale signs stuck on people's property.
Unfortunately, that's not a P&Z issue.
Why'd you put this up here again?
Oh, I was just showing you the undesirable tree list. So, and I think there's a couple more on the back, just as an item for y'all to see.
So the ones you're listing in your proposed change to the UDC, these are the trashy trash trees.
So there is a species exemption of 7 species specific. And they're even on, most of them are on this undesirable list as well. But, for example, one that's not, Weisach is one. We get a lot of Weisach that comes in, so that's not a tree that we would say we want you to plant. It's not on the species exemption in that exemption section for those 7. Oftentimes, it does not get big enough to be a heritage-sized tree. But what we're saying is, yeah, for the most part, if you've got an 8-inch Weisach or 10-inch Weisach, that's probably even multi-truncated. Is that really the tree that we're trying to preserve? We would say staff's opinion is typically no. It's not the elms, the oaks, the quality shade trees, the quality hardwoods, those things that are lasting trees that really give the city the character that it has today.
I find your tree snobbery humorous. No, I do. Having grown up in West Texas, these are like our trees.
Yeah.
They're like the only trees we
Mesquite,
had.
Weisach.
We
They're
would
native.
never dream of cutting these trees down. But I'm here now, so.
I lived
grew
in
up with
Lubbock for a
most of
few
you.
years, so yeah, I appreciate that any tree that provides shade is a wanted tree.
I grew up with most of these in Louisiana, so I didn't like them then, I don't like them now. Bryce, I think this is yeoman's work that you and anyone on the staff who's assisted you in doing this. I think it's a good product. I think it's a move in the right direction. And like you said, it's like the chairman said, it's something that if we don't like it, if it doesn't seem to be working well and we want to throttle back, we can. But for the time being, I think this is a right move. I think it's a good move, and I'll support this.
Any other comments or questions? All right, gentlemen, this would be for a possible recommendation to council. Do I have a motion?
And just as before any motions are made, remember, we'll have to include the correction in the motion, and staff will make that correction before it goes to council.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend that we move this amendment to City Council with the correction stated by Mr. Cox and Mr. Greenwald. Case ZC 2018-001 UDC amendment to section 21.9.9 tree preservation and mitigation.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, second by Mr. Greenwald. Any other comments or questions, gentlemen? Go for a vote.
Aye.
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 Nay.
Aye. Motion carries 5-1. Next item on the agenda, request by commissioners to place items on a future planning and zoning agenda. Gentlemen, do you have anything you wish to bring forward?
I will ask a question. Seems that the last few meetings we've had zoning changes, or zoning requests for zoning changes on major thoroughfares in our central corridor. Should we continue to take these individual zoning requests as they come up, or should we take it upon ourselves to look at our major corridors in the central section that we've not looked at in the last several years and look at them for a sweeping zoning change?
Actually, that was a conversation that we had this morning, Bryce and Emily. Staff is looking at bringing forward, beginning the process to look at and possibly make some amendments to our sector plans. And Bryce is working on the budget proposal as well to see whether or not we want to look at bringing in a third-party firm or not. So we've recognized it, and we're starting to move on it.
And Mr. Dalla, I'm sorry, Mr. Rowe, Mr. Dalla asked earlier if we would on an upcoming item, have an item to identify the areas of our comprehensive plan identify areas of our zoning map which are not in conformance with our comprehensive plan to really kind of start that conversation. So I would expect that to probably come up hopefully at the end of February or beginning of March. I think staff is really trying to focus to get through the impact fee items and a couple other projects that we've got on the back burner. And again, we're still short a staff member, so we're kind of hoping until they get back on board, we can get caught up a little bit and then work through that if that is acceptable. And I can most likely roll that same conversation into this entire workshop.
That's acceptable, and I'll take that. Second question is something you mentioned earlier, my question regarding Lazar Parkway. If you can just clarify, you're working with the residents?
Yes, so, and I don't know which way it's going to go yet. We've had a number of conversations back and forth, whether it's an HOA-maintained park or a city-maintained park. However, since it's come off the master thoroughfare plan, there is enough area that of HOA land and right-of-way that there is a possibility to have a linear park that does loop, so there's no real dead end to it. Staff's been evaluating this. The HOA's been working with Parks Department through part of it because, as you know, it goes beyond just the reserve at Schertz too, but also includes Reserve 1, Laura Heights, and I think a little bit of Ivy Estates that all had hands in Lazar Parkway. As we get a little further, I'm happy to bring an update back to P&Z on that.
So next step for us, assuming this takes place, would be an agenda item to change the zoning for that particular property.
It would not be. So there's not an issue on the zoning there. Since it is right-of-way, it would go to City Council as an abandonment of right-of-way potentially, or a pickup of the HOA lots by the city. I don't know which way it's going to go yet. As we work through that, I'm happy to myself or Brian or Parks provide an update to the commission.
Well, under the current bylaws that we're working under, that we discussed at our subcommittee meeting, that one of the things that is listed as a P&Z item is recommendations to council on abandonment of stuff right away. So announcements by commissioners. Anybody? All right, announcements by staff.
So we received one new site plan between January 5th and January 19th when we put this agenda out. It is the existing Autumn Winds Living and Rehabilitation Center on 3009. So here's their existing, and they are currently proposing a 22,316 square foot expansion, which would connect to the existing and is shown here. They are proposing another drive and more parking, as well as connecting to the existing drive.
All right. Does anybody have anything else? All right. Meeting adjourned at 8:12.